This is the Tom Bigby Tales. I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi on the Tom Bigby River called Columbus, and sometimes I write about the rest of the state. This episode is about baseball, one of my favorite topics, but specifically baseball in the early days of Columbus, Mississippi, right around its first centennial. In 1913, the World Championship Baseball game series between the New York Giants and the Philadelphia Athletics were, of course, not televised, but updates could be wired to specific people who paid quite a bit of money to be included in the news wires. In Columbus, those news wires were updated and sent to the Princess Theater to Mr. Eddie Kuykendall, who was the manager there. And he held a matinee of sorts where interested parties could pay a small fee and sit and get the updates every few minutes on the various innings. Why? Well, baseball was very popular nationwide, but the local area was especially interested in this particular series because a former local baseball player, when the local team, the Columbus Discoverers, were part of the Cotton States League, which was like a D league back in the day, a farm team of sorts, had played in Columbus a guy named Al Demery, and he had played there in 1908 and was now playing for the New York Giants in the World Championship Series of 1913. So the people of Columbus were especially excited to hear how their friend Demery was doing. Now, Columbus minor league teams uh, had various names over the years. In 1907 and 1908, we had the Columbus Discoverers. And then from 1912 to 1913, we had a Class D team, kind of a resurrection of the Discoverers, but they were called the Joyriders. And then in 1935, we had a Class C team who were actually part of the East Dixie League. They were called the Bengals. Columbus first hosted minor league baseball in 1907. The Columbus Discoverers were members of what was called the Cotton States League that consisted of 6 teams. Those teams were the Gulfport Crabs, the Jackson Senators, the Meridian White Ribbons, the Mobile Seagulls, and the Vicksburg Hillbillies. And they all played round robin style in their various communities. The 1907 Discoverers finished last in their very first season of play. But they ended the season with a 42-96 record to place 6th in the final standings, meaning the very bottom. They were managed by Jack Law, and Columbus finished 42 and a half games behind first place team, the Mobile Seagulls, in the final standings. The Cotton States League at that time had no playoffs. The Discoverers continued playing in the same league in 1908, and this time they improved to 4th place finished, and they were managed by Billy May, Lewis Hall, Ace Stewart, and Jack Toft. Now, Ace Stewart was a Major League Baseball player who played for the Chicago Colts in the 1895 season. He batted and threw right-handed. He was from Terre Haute, Indiana. At that time, when Columbus was in the 1908 series, they finished 12 games behind first place Jackson Senators. Their pitcher, Al Demery, led the Cotton States League with 23 wins. Demery is the guy that the people wanted to know more about and were willing to pay Ed Kuykendall to get the wire updates. And Demery is the guy who went on to play for the New York Giants. He played from 1912 to 1919 in the Major League Baseball. He started with the New York Giants, played in that World Series. He then went to the Philadelphia Phillies and then the Chicago Cubs and the Boston Braves eventually to finish out his career. Following the 1908 season, the Cotton States League did not play in 1909, but returned to play in 1910, but there was no Columbus franchise. In 1912, Columbus rejoined the Cotton States League during the 1912 season, and this time they placed fourth again. The Columbus Riders began to play when the Hattiesburg Timberjacks franchise moved to Columbus on June 5th, 1912, with a record of 19-24. They eventually compiled a 37-35 record while based in Columbus. The team finished with an overall record of 56-59, playing under manager Carlos Smith in both locations. The now Columbus Joyriders finished 13.5 games behind the first place Vicksburg Hillbillies in their final standings. Walt Kinney, a pitcher of Columbus, led the Cotton States League at that time with 22 wins. On June 11, 1912, Columbus played a doubleheader against the Yazoo City Zoos. Reportedly, the Columbus catcher was injured in the second inning of that first game, and Columbus did not have another player to play catcher. Taylor, the catcher for Yazoo City, then volunteered to play catcher for both teams in order for the game to be played. Yazoo City was noted to have won both games, with Taylor catching 32 total innings behind the plate. Ouch, that's a lot of bended knee. The Columbus Joyriders continued to play in the 1913 Cotton States League, and they ended that season in fourth place with a record of 40-57, where they played under manager Bob Kennedy, and this would be their final season of Cotton League. The Joyriders finished 32 games behind first place Jackson Lawmakers. The pitcher, Ed Poole of Columbus, led the league with 163 strikeouts. The Cotton States League shortened their season to August 15th in 1913 and did not return to play in 1914 due to the start of World War I. Minor League Baseball briefly returned to Columbus in 1935 for a partial season. The Columbus Bengals, the new name for the local team, briefly played as members of the 8-team Class C level East Dixie League. On June 18, 1935, the Columbus Bengals moved to Cleveland, Mississippi with a record of 36-41. After compiling a 28-32 record while in Cleveland, the Cleveland Bengals placed 6th in the final standings under manager Slim Brewer with a 64-73 overall record. The Columbus-Cleveland team finished 19.5 games behind the first place Pine Bluff Judges in the final standings. The East Dixie League permanently folded following the 1935 season. There has not been another Columbus-hosted minor league team since. The team actually played their home games at what is called Fairground Parks. Today, the Columbus Fairgrounds are still in use as a public fairgrounds, and they're owned by the city of Columbus, and they're located out Highway 69. It's where it's called the fairgrounds because that's where we held the fair. No playoffs were held in the 1907 and 1908 year. And in 1912, their manager, Carlos Smith, helped them finish with their best finish of fourth place and their best record. Some notable alumni of the Columbus teams was Mac Pendleton Allison, who was a professional baseball player who played 16 career seasons with including the St. Louis Browns. He was a pitcher most of his career. He compiled a record of 9-21 with a 3.17 ERA. Orthstein or Buck Collins was an outfielder and pitcher who left Columbus and played for the New York Highlanders and the Washington Senators. He played for the Senators after playing in Columbus. In 13 career games, he had 6 hits, all for the Highlanders, and a .250 batting average. Al Demery, as noted before, went on to play for the New York Giants, the Philadelphia Phillies, the Chicago Cubs, and the Boston Braves, and his career lasted from 1912 to 1919 in the major leagues. Billy Kinlock, who played for the Columbus Discoverers in 1907, went on to play in the major league, and he played 1 game at third base in 1895 for St. Louis Browns. He went on to live in New York City, and lived to a ripe old age of about 40 years old. Frank Manish was played for the Columbus Discoverers. He went on to play for the Philadelphia Athletics in that same game in 1908. He must not have been as popular as Al Demery. And in 23 games, he had 12 hits in 77 at-bats with a 156 batting average. He batted and threw right-handed. And his brother also played in the major leagues. In 1913, playing for the Joyriders, was Kenneth William Penner, who went on to be a pitcher in the major leagues for the Cleveland Indians in 1916, and the pennant-winning Chicago Cubs in 1929, although he did not appear in the World Series. Another member of the Joyriders was Philip Hayden Redding. He was a Major League Baseball player who had 3 starts in 1912 and 1 relief appearance in 1913, all for the St. Louis Cardinals. In the Columbus Bengals team, the 1935 team, was Cully Rickard, who was a professional baseball player, and he played 3 seasons in 1941, 1942, and 1947 Major League Baseball, all with the Pittsburgh Pirates of the National League. He was primarily an outfielder. Dolly Stark played with the Discoverers on that 1907-1908 team. He was actually an American college baseball coach, and as well as a professional baseball player. And he coached the Mississippi State A&M at the time, Aggies, to a 22-4 record in 1909. He then went on to play shortstop in Cleveland and in Brooklyn. Ace Stewart played in that 1907-1908 team of the Cotton League series with the Discoverers, and he went on to play Major League Baseball for the but his time with the Major League was prior to playing for the Discoverers, and he played for the Chicago Colts and in the 1895 season, and he batted and threw right-handed. A member of the Joyriders was Oliver Henry Wealth, known as Ollie. He played in 1912 for the Joyriders, and then he played 1 season in Major League Baseball, where he made 1 appearance for the Cleveland Indians as a pinch runner on August 30th against in a I'm just stumbling. Sorry. He appeared in 1 game again in 1916 as a pinch runner for their team. He spent most of his time in the minor leagues as an outfielder. The last member of note is played in the 1935 Bengals team, and his name was Fred Hap Williams. He's also known as Pappy Williams and Papa Williams in some other sources. He was a professional baseball player who played first baseman and then a manager, and he continued to manage from after 1935 to 1955, um, off and on. In 1945, he made 16 appearances with the Cleveland Indians. He totaled 4 hits in 19 at bats with 1 walk. Williams batted and threw right-handed. He had played baseball, basketball, and football at Meridian High School, and when he graduated, he came to Columbus to debut for the Columbus Cleveland Bengals in the East Dixie League in 1935. He was known for his 338 batting average with the Bengals, and uh, he was traded from the Bengals to the Memphis Chickasaws in the Southern Association, where he was then eventually um, picked up for the South Atlantic League, et cetera, and began to work as a player manager in the Northern League and working his way up to play for the Cleveland Indians in 1945. His first major league debut was against the Chicago White Sox, again, where he pinch hit and failed to reach base in the 8th inning. After that, like many players, he left baseball to join the U.S. Army. Unfortunately, he couldn't pass the physical, and he returned to the minor leagues. And that is the story of baseball in Columbus, Mississippi. I want to thank you for coming on my tour of Columbus and Lowndes County and the Tombigbee Tales. Until next time.